So have you ever wondered why it's so hard to stick to financial goals, even when we know what to do? It's not a lack of discipline. It's often because our brain's reward system is being hijacked by everyday chaos. But once we understand what's actually happening in our brain and behavior, we can actually build consistency without burnout. Okay, so today I'm talking about a topic that so many of us may have quietly wrestled with, and that's how to stay consistent with money goals, even when life gets busy. Okay, so let's start with something foundational, right? When it comes to staying consistent with money goals, one of the strongest tools we could potentially try is mental simulation, so also known as future visualization. Neuroscience shows that when we vividly imagine the process of reaching a goal, not just the outcome, we activate brain regions involved in planning and motivation, for example. So these include the prefrontal cortex, which handles long-term thinking, and the striatum, which is involved in reward anticipation. So research shows that people who not only visualize their desired future, but also mentally rehearse the steps to get there, are way more likely to follow through. So this technique is also known as something called mental contrasting, right? It's a concept, and it's especially powerful when life gets chaotic because it keeps our brain anchored to actually what really matters. So instead of just thinking, I'm going to save more, I want to save more, we might try picturing ourselves actually saying no to impulse buys, transferring money into savings, or planning meals at home. It's about giving the brain a rehearsal script, right? We could take 30 seconds before bed, for example, to visualize the next day, maybe even choosing to cook instead of ordering, or, checking our budget before scrolling. It's a small act, but it may just help keep our brain aligned with our intentions. And you know what? It's also a beautiful space to invite God in. So what helps most isn't just knowing what we want, it's basically teaching the brain to move like someone who's already on the way. Okay, so next, let dopamine work with you, not against you. And you're probably thinking, what's she even on about? But let me unpack. So some days we don't even feel motivated to do anything, but here's what's fascinating. The brain doesn't work that way. Dopamine, the chemical that drives motivation, is actually released before we get the reward, not after. So it's the brain's way of saying, hold on, keep going, just keep going, something good is coming. But, and this is important, that dopamine release doesn't always happen automatically. So the brain often needs a cue to trigger it. If the goal feels too vague, far away, or disconnected from our current moment, the brain doesn't sense it's time to get moving. So we don't always feel motivated up front, but we can create the conditions to generate it. So this is basically where visual cues come in. So if we're trying to stay consistent with our money goals, for example, we could potentially show our brain some kind of progress. So like ticking off a checker or moving a post-it that marks paid off. These cues really help signal to the brain, hold on, we're heading somewhere. And that's when dopamine actually gets involved. So research shows that when the brain sees progress, it activates both the striatum and the prefrontal cortex. And these are the areas responsible for reward anticipation and planning. And together, they basically create that forward pull feeling that can help us keep showing up. So for instance, let's say we're like saving for a goal or trying to pay something off. Even if the steps are small, like transferring £5 or reviewing one bill, showing that progress visually helps the brain stay on track. So we could even try using checklists, savings, charts, for example, or even like simple habit streaks. But once the brain sees movement, it's far more likely to stay engaged. And when we feel stuck, we might not even need more discipline. We might just need to show our brain, hold on, we've already started. So ultimately, motivation isn't something we wait for, it's something that we can invite. So one reason it can feel so hard to stay consistent with money goals is because they sometimes feel external, right? Like something we're doing for future us, but not current us. But when we anchor those goals in identity, who we believe we are, they start to feel more natural. So in psychology, this is known as identity-based motivation. So when we see a behavior as part of who we are, for example, we're more likely to keep doing it. So even when life gets busy, so instead of saying, oh, I want to save money, the shift could potentially be, hold on, I'm someone who's becoming more financially grounded. So the brain actually supports this shift. So studies have shown that when our goals align with our self-image, we activate brain regions associated with self-relevant and intrinsic reward. So this basically means the goal starts to feel more meaningful. So practically, we could reflect on what our financial habits say about our identity. If we're paying attention to our spending, for example, does that actually reflect discipline, wisdom, a desire to steward well? For those of us who are faith-led, this might even be a moment to reconnect with why we're doing it. Right? So for instance, I might pray, Lord, help me steward what you've given me with clarity and care. So that small moment could really just remind me this isn't about deprivation, it's about alignment. So when our money goals reflect who we're becoming, not just what we're doing, they get easier to stay consistent with. Okay, so sometimes we often think we're failing if we don't hit every money milestone on time. But that belief comes from something in psychology called outcome bias. When we judge our progress solely by the results and not the process. So psychology reminds us that growth is often non-linear, right? And financial habits are emotional. So when life gets busy, we need a room to really just adapt, not shame ourselves for being behind. Real financial rewiring comes from a concept called habitual scaffolding. So that's the small, consistent systems we build over time. We're not meant to overhaul our finances overnight. It's not possible. We're meant to really create cues and rhythms that help money choices feel less chaotic and more aligned. So for instance, let's say like we wanted to save £1,000 in 3 months, but then work may have got really overwhelming. I don't know, maybe family needs came up and you was only able to save £250. It's tempting to feel behind, but here's the thing, we built a habit, we actually showed up. So that £250 wasn't the full target, no, but it was progress. And with that habit in place, guess what? When life settles, we're just more likely to reach the original goal. Actually, that brings us perfectly onto our next point, right? When life gets busy, unpredictability often knocks our money plans off track sometimes. So that's because the brain hates uncertainty. The anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region which is involved in error detection, goes into hyper alert mode when plans go sideways. So this makes us feel unsettled and just react emotionally, right? Not strategically at all. But if we plan for disruptions in advance, you know, like sudden bills which come, the brain relaxes. So we've literally reduced the cognitive load. This concept is rooted in behavioural science, right? It's called a pre-commitment strategy. So when we make certain decisions in advance, so we're not caught off guard. So a real life example is this, right? Maybe we say, hold on, if I can't save this month, fair enough, but I'll review my spending instead. Or if I order a takeaway, I'll balance it with a no spend day. These aren't restrictions, no, they're pre-decisions. They basically anchor the brain when life throws random expenses at us, which it does. But you know what? Anticipating chaos doesn't actually make us negative. No, it makes us steady. And this is coming from an optimist. Me, I'm an optimistic person, but I'm having to really acknowledge this fact. So basically, when the brain knows what to do next, money goals feel less overwhelming. Okay, so let's talk about budgeting fatigue. The feeling when the spreadsheet or the tracker that once excited us just now just feels heavy. It's not laziness, honestly, it's not. It's just saturation. So the brain may need like novelty or something new to stay engaged, right? And using the same system over and over can basically lead to something psychologists call hedonistic adaptation, which basically means where the brain gets used to something and stops responding emotionally. That's why sometimes, honestly, refreshing our budgeting method isn't avoidance, it's strategy. So it keeps the brain stimulated, which keeps us engaged. So maybe 1 month, for example, we use like a digital tracker, or maybe we gamify our savings by creating a visual savings board. None of these are permanent, but rotating them every few months can stop budgeting feeling like a chore. So we could even have seasonal approaches, right? So a detailed spreadsheet during quiet months and a flexible note-taking system during the busier months. So the goal isn't perfection, it's about momentum. So when consistency fades, which sometimes it does, creativity can actually restore it. How cool is that? So our system should basically serve us and not the other way around. So I absolutely love this next point, and I think it's just because I find it really interesting. So emotional forecasting. So this basically means don't just plan the task, plan the feeling. So even when we have good intentions, some money tasks just feel emotionally heavy, right? So budgeting, tracking, spending, saying no to something we really, really wanted. These moments often trigger avoidance. But what's fascinating is that the brain often exaggerates the discomfort, which is so true. I've experienced this. So psychologists call this emotional forecasting, right? So it's our tendency to predict how we'll feel in the future. But the catch, so we're often wrong. Studies show that we actually tend to overestimate how bad something will feel and underestimate how quickly we'll adjust or feel relief afterwards. So we could put off reviewing our bank account because we think it will feel overwhelming, right? But once we're in it, it's rarely as bad as we imagined. Also, that post-task relief often comes with a feeling of control, right? Which just reinforces motivation. So instead of just scheduling the task, like I'll look at my finances on Sunday, for example, we could actually also schedule the feeling. So we might say something like, hold on, I want to feel clear-headed by Monday, or I want to feel empowered when I look at my money this week. That tiny mental shift just gives the brain a different anchor. Not the dread of the task, no, but the reward of the feeling. It's almost like attaching emotions to outcomes, right? Not obligation. So we could even take this further with a short mental rehearsal, like beforehand. So something like visualizing how we'll feel after taking action. That primes the brain to associate the task with resolution instead of resistance. Planning a task is helpful, but planning how we want to feel afterwards, that's what helps us follow through. And I think that's why I find this point is so interesting. All right, so moving on. Staying consistent with money isn't just about knowledge, it's about emotional capacity, right? So because let's be real, when life gets hectic and busy and we get overwhelmed, even simple financial tasks can just feel a lot. So from a neuroscience perspective, this connects to the concept of cognitive load, which is basically the total mental effort we're using at a given moment. So when that load is high, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain involved in decision making and planning, just struggles a bit more to function at its best. So that's when we default to our old habits or avoidance. So to stay consistent, we could try building a financial buffer, for example, not just with money, but with emotional space. So this might look like pre-scheduling a weekly 10-minute money check-in, right? Or automating our transfers when our brain is fresh, or preparing ahead before high-stress periods like Christmas, for example. Psychologically, this basically helps preserve executive function, right? So we're designing around our bandwidth instead of working against it. The key is to build buffers before we even need them. So not after we've already hit our limit. So let's say we know we'll be traveling or working longer hours like next month. We could actually just batch pay bills in advance or meal plan to reduce spending triggers, or even write a money journal entry about what we want to protect during this busy season. So these buffers really just reduce friction, so we're not relying on willpower alone. So what I'm trying to say here is that consistency isn't about doing more. It's about creating space, mental, emotional, and logistical for our money habits to breathe. And finally, but also a really significant point, is that when everything feels busy or blurry or just off track, we could try coming back to the why, right? So why do our money goals matter? Psychologically, this links to value affirmation theory. So when we reflect on our deeper values, our brain reduces stress and strengthens motivation. So studies have shown that even like writing about a personal value for 10 minutes can just buffer against feeling overwhelmed and just increase our follow through. So the brain realigns with what matters, and that changes everything. So this isn't about writing a budget, it's about anchoring to the emotion beneath it. What are we really saving for? Maybe it's safety, maybe it's freedom. When we name that, the values under the goal, the numbers become meaningful again. So next is a Bible verse that I think will link really well with this, and that's Proverbs 21:5, right? And it reminds us that the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance. So it's like a quiet encouragement that when our plans are intentional, even the smallest steps can multiply. So we can even put visual cues around us, right? A phrase on our phone, like a picture on our wall. Anything, honestly, that just reminds us of the purpose behind the plan. Because honestly, remembering your why is going to be one of the biggest motivators to get you to where you need to be. Life will always get busy, but when our why is strong, our money habits don't just survive, they hold steady. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've left you some financial well-being guides in the description box, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.